Please welcome to the stage, Be Me co-founder, Benjamin Carlton.
Feel the sun is high and the water runs dry.
Hello, 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 hello. How y'all doing? Was lunch good? Now, when I made the joke yesterday about the fried chicken team, I don't know who on the team, I didn't mean nix it. I wanted some more. So it was all right. Yesterday, someone mentioned we started on the mountaintop, and then somebody else joked, well, it's only downhill from here. I said, well, you've not been to a Be Me experience. It's only up from here. So we're going to have an amazing conversation titled The Next Narrative for Health Equity. We all want to unleash the power of narrative to create a better future for our families, our communities, and our nations. Yet so many times our narrative work is splintered and fragmented. Instead of a charged current powering our work forward, our narrative work can be a stray voltage that creates noise and sparks but powers nothing. But there is a better way. For the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, this means paving the way together to a future where health is no longer a privilege, but a right. Join Robert Wood Foundation's VP for Communications, Allyn Brooks-LaSure, in conversation with the Communications Network CEO, Sean Gibbons, for a conversation on marshaling the power of narrative to usher in a better future for everyone. Please put your hands together for Allyn Brooks-LaSure.
Thank you. Can y'all hear me? First off, that is a big picture of me. Where are my introverts here? Where are my introverts? It is an arresting feeling to come out here and see a picture that size out here of yourself. So actually, this is we're rebranding and doing new headshots. And they gave me a set of options. And one of the options they showed me, the guy was looking at the photographer. He was like, oh my God, this is the right picture. He was like, I look at this and I see a guy I want to hang out with. And I was like, well, don't use that picture then, because I'm an introvert. I'm not trying to hang out with anybody. So anyway, I am Allyn. It's a pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. I work in the communications department at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and want to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the things that we're learning and experiencing and aspiring toward in our communications work. So true to form, there we go. True to form, there's a PowerPoint presentation. Just for 10 minutes, I promise you, and then we'll have a conversation with Sean. I am learning in philanthropy, I've only been in philanthropy a little less than 4 years, that they do everything by PowerPoint presentation. Like, I actually think people in philanthropy read their kids' bedtime stories using a PowerPoint presentation. I've never, it's not necessary all the times we use a presentation. But what I want to be able to do is just share at the top of this conversation just some things to ground us in what we're learning, what we've heard, and how it is that we are trying to evolve as a foundation and as a health philanthropy. The past couple of years have been one of transformation for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. We've spent a lot of time asking a lot of questions of our partners, of grantees, of our peers, of health practitioners and learners, trying to get a better sense of, as we look to the future, how should we show up? How should we think about narrative? How should we approach it in partnership with others? And how we should think of ourselves and what we should aspire to. So if we were having this conversation even 6 months ago, I would have told you that the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is the nation's largest health philanthropy that's focused on building a culture of health where everyone has a fair and just opportunity to health and well-being. Well, we don't say that anymore. What we're saying now is we're showing, got ahead of me. We're saying this, not the other arrow thing, where this is now our new purpose after lots of conversations and lots of consultations with many of our partners, where they said things like, we need a foundation, we need RWJF to be bold, we need your voice to be bold. It is important that your voice make a distinct sound as we're advocating for the things that are in front of us. You're not doing this by yourself, RWJF. We're paving the way together to this future that we all share, right? And this is the purpose that we have, that now every day when we go into work that we're setting ourselves out to trying to achieve. But there is a huge roadblock that's stopping all of us from getting there. And it's simple. It's structural racism in health and other forms of discrimination. So we are now focused on addressing, naming, and confronting this impediment that's stopping us from getting to health equity in a future where health is no longer a privilege, but a right. So during the course of all of these conversations with partners, we're trying to think about how should we think about narrative? How should we think about positioning ourselves? What is the value that we as a foundation can bring? Wait, that went backwards. Like the first value we can bring is like pushing the right button, right? So starting with the purpose that we laid out of really reaching this place where health is, this future where health is no longer a privilege but a right. Who can disagree with that, by the way? We're leading with a value. We're leading with an aspirational future that hopefully nobody's like, well, actually, it should be a privilege, right? This is something that hopefully there can be common agreement and common understanding around. What happens before that is what internally we refer to as our generational goals. We also don't believe there should be any dispute about these, and there are three of them. The first is economic inclusion for family well-being. What's to disagree with there? Ensuring that we have economic systems that make sure our families are healthy and whole, a tax system that rewards family, that we think about the definitions of care and what does care and caregiving actually mean in today's society, economic inclusion for family well-being, that we have equitable and accountable public health and healthcare systems, right? We don't have that right now. We don't have, it's not equitable, nor is it accountable. We believe that is a precondition to getting to this future where we want to be. And the final generational goal is healthy conditions for families, so healthy community conditions for family, right? So these are the three generational goals that we believe lead us to the ultimate purpose that we're trying to get to. And then that leads us to why we're all here, right? Conversations about narrative. And we see all of that filtering up to this purpose that we're trying to get to. And we spent a lot of time figuring out, all right, well, how do we situate ourselves? How do we sort of align this so there's narrative harmony, right? So RWJF isn't coming in and handing out a song sheet to everybody, but we're trying to fit our voice into conversations that started well before we even got into the mix. And this is what it looks like for us. So there are three sort of, there's no test on this, I promise you. And true to philanthropy, there's charts and arrows. The thing to remember from this, though, is clear, cohesive, and consequential. You're going to hear me say those three words a lot. Clear, cohesive, and consequential. So for us in the middle, for RWJF's voice, what we heard was, we need you all to be bold. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the ways that we're trying to keep faith with that expectation from our partners. All the way on the other side are partner voices, and we only have a couple bullets under there, but it's actually a huge category of people who are doing the work all over the place, that are in the field, that are other philanthropies. How can we support them? How can we be in partnership with them? How can we be in harmony with them? And the third category is something that we refer to as the greater voice. A lot of times when we talk about narrative, we immediately think about messages and things to say, what to say and what not to say. It's a messaging document, it's polling. My view is it's great to have an amazing song, but that song does nothing if you don't have a microphone or speakers. We have to think about the infrastructure that also goes along with all of the conversations that we're having about narrative. It also means that we need to think about the media system as it exists in community as well as nationally. And finally, a portfolio that we refer to as FACES: faith, arts, culture, entertainment, and sports. All of the cultural air around us that actually shapes many of the conversations that we have in our neighborhoods, in our homes, and within our families. So this is what we're working toward, right? And this is not perfect. We're still iterating this as we continue to do this work. And I'll just talk a little bit more about each of these categories. So going back to our voice, we heard consistently, we need RWJF to be bold. So during the past 3 years, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, not that we have this figured out, but we're trying, We have spoken out on things that we have never spoken out on before. So for the first time in our then 50-year history, we put out a statement saying that reproductive rights and reproductive justice is a health and health equity issue. The foundation had never spoken publicly on reproductive rights in 50 years. The next year, we put out a statement talking about gun safety, how that is a health and health equity issue. If the leading cause of death of our young people is gun violence, how can we not speak about that if we're a foundation that's focused on this future where health is no longer a privilege but a right? In addition to speaking out about that, we weighed in on January 6th. We put out a statement following the sentencing of Derek Chauvin, where we said police violence was a health and health equity issue. Now, we can't speak about everything, but what we are trying to do is model using RWJF's voice on issues, quite honestly, where we hadn't spoken out on them before. And there's something else behind this. When we had a lot of our conversations with partners and other peers, they actually said that our voice can be useful not just so people know what RWJF thinks about something, but so we can give air cover to other partners who want to speak about this issue, but they have more to lose than we do. They have more at stake than we do. So the charge was, y'all are sitting on all that money. You all use it. Give us air cover to be able to operate and to be able to say these things, right? So that is what we're trying to do. We haven't figured it out, but it's what we're trying to do. The next category is partner voices. Now, we do a lot to provide direct support to partners. We fund communications firms to actually work directly with many of our grantees and other partners. We pay for funding. We have funded the largest trans survey that has actually ever happened in this country. We underwrote that in the communication strategy that went around it, right? So we're trying to do things to be able to bolster not our voice. It's not about hearing us. It's for you to be able to hear from partners the way they want to talk about it on their own terms, but making sure that they have the resources and the platform and the amplification to be able to do it. So that's what partner voice means. And then finally, greater voice. As I said, we get stuck in conversations about narrative on the song sheet, on the song, on the lyrics. But we need the microphone, right? We need the platform. So some of the things that we're doing on the infrastructure side here, for example, it was nobody's job to wake up in the morning and see who's attacking health equity. We were all working toward this positive vision, but right now, health equity, as with other forms of DEI and inclusion, is under siege. So we are incubating an effort at the Opportunity Agenda where it will be somebody's job, and the person who's leading that just started 2 weeks ago. It will be their job every day to wake up and say, who's taking shots at health equity? And what is our response in keeping with our narrative strategy? Another thing that we're doing is, I'm coming immediately from a civil rights organization. I was at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, and I noticed something working there. We always got the last call to join something that somebody else said, because they always needed a civil rights voice to join. And it was a belated invitation, right? They had already set it up, they had already picked the venue, and they looked at it and they're like, oh my God, we can't do this. We better get a person of color to come here. Call a civil rights organization, right? So when I got to RWJF, I was like, we put a lot of money out in the street on Washington. Let me just have a phone conversation with some folks and ask them, was health equity, like what health equity partners do you have? And they all said the same thing, oh, we need to do a better job. And then I say, okay, so how was health equity embedded in your strategy before you even decided to have a press call? Oh, we need to do a better job. So what we're trying to do is create space where partners are sitting on equal footing to have conversations and to work together to build connectivity for the big fights ahead of us. It's actually an infrastructure play. So we've brought together groups such as, UNIDOS and the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, but also Black Voters Matters and the National Black Women's Health Imperative and others to sit on equal footing at the same table, regardless of their resources, to be able to think about how to work together to solve some of the communications challenges that we have in front of us. Our FACES portfolio, faith, arts, culture, entertainment, and sports. We're doing a lot in that regard. If any of you have seen the movie Origin Origin. We were a funder of that movie. And not only were we a funder, we also invested in Ava DuVernay's platform, Array Alliance, because we don't just want to sort of find good pieces of content, single content. We're trying to invest in platforms. We're doing the same thing with Illuminative. Illuminative is an organization that is really focused on the visibility and the narrative about Native people in this country. They have been a grantee of ours for the past couple of years. They've just started a new media and production company. So part of our grant for them this year was actually seeding money into that production company, trying to support that platform that is lifting up new narratives about Native people in the United States. So again, this is this crazy consultant chart that, you know what I mean? Like, I can't wait to be a consultant of philanthropy, by the way. Hire me to be your consultant when I will do all the pretty PowerPoint presentations for you if you, but this is what we're working toward. Like I said, we're doing this imperfectly, but this is, I wanted to sort of set the stage for this, leading into the conversation that we'll have with Sean. Finally, there were 3 words that I said that you'll hear me say a lot. That's clear, it's cohesive, and it's consequential. That's a charge for all of us doing narrative work. It's not just a charge for RWJF. Anybody who is in the business of narrative, is your narrative clear? Is it clear to you? How many times do we say things that they're not even clear to us, but we think we have to say it because someone else said we need to say it, right? We don't even interrogate our own stuff that we say, right? The other is cohesive. Is it actually aligned with what the movement is saying? Is it in line with what people who do this work every day, how they're expressing this? Is there cohesion? And then finally, is it consequential? There is nothing that I find more offensive in this work than inefficiency. I find inefficiency to be insulting because it diminishes the opportunity for impact, right? So don't tell me to tweet something out if you can't tell me who's actually on the receiving end of it and why we think that that'll make a difference. It's not just about churning out content. It's saying that we want to associate the opportunity for consequence with everything we say, everything we do, every place we show up. So clear, cohesive, and consequential. And all of those together has to be in harmony. It has to be in harmony with what folks are saying and how it sounds together as enduring narratives, not just for the short term. So with that, I am pleased to bring up on the stage the president and CEO of the Communications Network, Sean Gibbons.
Hey, man. How are you? Hey, everybody. Well, you just gave me a title bump.
What'd I call you?
President. I don't think I have the
Oh,
presidency.
my man. The chancellor of the Communications Network. We could keep it going. Keep it
to czar or
the
something?
vicar.
Well, thank you, Right Reverend. Nice to see you all. All right, so the next little while, we're going to have a conversation about what this all actually means and how it works in practice.
Doesn't mean anything.
Doesn't mean anything. All right. Well, it was a nice PowerPoint.
I appreciate it.
The biggest thing that's sort of pregnant in all that you've said here is that y'all are trying to lead a conversation about race in America. That can't possibly be a dangerous or perilous thing to do.
Oh, it's easy to talk about race. Easiest conversation you can have in America, right? I think that there is no more difficult conversation to have in this country, right? There isn't. And I think people are not taking the issue seriously if they think it's going to be an easy conversation, but that shouldn't stop us from having it, right? And I think that we find ourselves toggling between like, oh my gosh, it's so scary to talk about this issue, and then we don't get the results. We don't get closer to the future that we're trying to build. And I think the conclusion that we reached is there's no way for us to talk about health equity or this future without actually talking about this barrier that was constructed, right? All these bricks didn't accidentally fall in our way. They were put there by people. Yep. And we have to talk about that. We have to talk about it smartly, right? So, I'm not gonna be like, hey, y'all are there's a thoughtful way to have the conversation, but we can't shirk the conversation.
How is that getting to this place internally? Talk me through that journey. Was that difficult? Because clearly this is a pretty profound shift for a $13 billion endowed foundation. So I've been with the foundation, it'll be 4 years in December, and these conversations started prior to my arrival. And in fact, the groundwork for the health equity work started long before I arrived there. I think the way the conversation accelerated
was, in fact, my first day was when I was in a senior staff meeting and Rich approved making our focus on structural racism in health. It was my first day. And I was like, I don't even know who these people are, right? This was during COVID. I'm in a Zoom. All the faces were blurring together. It was my first day. Nobody knew my name. I didn't know theirs. And I was like, right. And I think when you say that, it's like, yeah, right on. And wait, hold on. What did we just say? There are going to be people who are, and we see it. We see people who are like, why is RWJF talking about this, right? We get responses to our newsletters like, stick with talking about healthcare. Like, why'd you get into all this racism stuff? And it's like, but that's connected, right?
So it started before you arrived, but building to this place, this is a communication strategy.
Yeah.
How did you all construct it? Was this something you did internally? I know you were talking to partners, but walk me through that process, because there was a lot of research involved, as I understand it.
We asked a lot of questions. I mean, one of the things that we did was really just as the organization was thinking about its transition, the conversation about comms was happening, obviously in concert and concurrently. We did a narrative audit, right? Just like one very mechanical thing where we asked a partner to look through reams of paper and document that we had put out since George Floyd's killing, right? So from 2002 into the latter, 2000 to the latter part of 2002. And what came back to us was, yeah, you guys are focused on the past, or you are leaning heavily on disparity data, which starts with a deficit, right? You're leading with, and my first job in Washington back in 2000 was at what was then called the National Prostate Cancer Coalition. Every sentence we started was, Black men have a higher incidence and mortality rate of prostate cancer. And we thought we were doing something by saying it that way, right? So this over heavy reliance on disparity data, which for all of the reasons that we've discussed over the past 2 days aren't helpful, right? They're not helpful from a narrative perspective. And the other thing that we heard, and again, this is post George Floyd, was, yeah, you guys mean well, but you sound kind of paternalistic from time to time. And you might want to think about sort of how your voice is actually showing up, right? We had to wrestle with that, right? And we still wrestle with it. It's not something you figure out. It's something you constantly remember and say, this is what folks were hearing when we thought we were doing the right things and saying it well. So it really started by asking questions, and then we went to lots of our partners and said, what are you all hearing when you hear us speak? So that laid the groundwork. And then internally, it was just figuring out, all right, so what's our response to this?
Let's go over to clear, consequential, and cohesive. And I just got that wrong. Clear, cohesive, and consequential. Can we unpack that? I know you told everybody about that, but what does clear mean? And I'm literally tossing the ball up for you to dunk it right now. $75 words, is that something you're a big fan of?
So he says that, but in high school and in college, I was in the band. So I haven't dunked any balls ever in my life. So if anybody reads my resume, it'll make your eyes cross, because I've worked in diplomacy and environment and international human rights and health advocacy, et cetera, et cetera. Every time I've worked in an industry, it was my first time working in that sector. And every time I have joined a sector, they speak crazy language.
Yeah.
I mean, it's bizarre. And like philanthropy is no exception. In fact, I find it probably to be a worst offender. And the question is, when we say we're clear, we think we're clear. And it's like the reagents of the proximity of the carceral, and it's like, who are we talking to?
Right.
What I think about is, I think about where I'm from. So I'm from a town in southern New Jersey called Bridgeton, New Jersey. It's my hometown. That's where I graduated high school. 70% of my family is still there, right? And it is a place of the hardest working, most faithful, fervent, conscientious people I know. But on all of the lists that anybody would draw up, it ranks the worst on all of these lists, right? Pound for pound. Like even some bigger cities you would know about in New Jersey, higher violent crime rates and all of the child poverty, et cetera, right? And the constant test, I call it the Bridgeton test, and I share this with my colleagues. Would this make sense to them? Not out of condescension, but they're smart people. They're the wisest people I know, right? Would they even understand what we were talking about? And why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they? And I think that language is, we can't get to narrative if we're stuck on this esoteric, insider, secret handshake, secret squirrel language that we use in this sector. It is gibberish. And I think it is gibberish. It actually aggravates me. I got an email from somebody that I hold in pretty high regard that works in this sector. I had to drop it into like Google's Gemini and say, can you rewrite this? Like, no joke, true story. And what it spit back, I was like, why didn't they write this? This was a much simpler message, and it was shorter, by the way. We have to constantly think about, are we being clear? And that's not clear with us, but are we clear with those in whom we're in dialogue and we're engaging? And that's not a question you answer one time. It's a question you ask every day. Cohesive. So I told y'all I was in the band. I was a band geek.
What'd you play?
I was a trumpet player, man.
Oh, right on.
I was a trumpet player. Yeah, we were the fighter pilots of the band. We're the jocks of the band. No, true story. That's true. That's true. Thank you. Can I get a witness? And there's.
And you went to band camp?
Watch your mouth. And there's nothing worse when you're in a musical setting than somebody who just wants to play their note their way and they're not in harmony with everyone else. They're on the right. It stands out and it messes up the whole song.
Yep.
Right? So are you speaking just your way because you think that's the way you should talk about it? Are you thinking and sensing and hearing what our partners are saying and how they're talking about the issue? And how does what we say complement that? So it's really just thinking about how we fit into it, right? Not just making sure we're the only one that's heard, but how we maximize our collective voices together.
And then consequential.
Oh man, I feel
Does that mean you all are on Twitter firing them off left and right?
I feel that down in my soul. What we do in this sector has to matter because the margin of error is high for philanthropy because we can take risks that our other partners don't afford to take. But that doesn't mean that we should lack discipline in wanting everything we try to do to be consequential, right? We're meant to learn from it. We're meant to, create space to grow and develop. But if it's not consequential and we don't think it's going to be consequential, why do it? Why do it? You just wasted everybody's time. You wasted money, you wasted time, you wasted effort, you wasted goodwill because you did something that was a drain on other people that we didn't even think was going to make a difference. Why?
How do you gauge that? Like, how do you know when this will be additive, this will be helpful, this will be consequential, whether that's on January 6th or after the conviction of Derek Chauvin or some of these other places where, and it's just as an example with statements. I'm sure it's not simply statements that have to be consequential.
You don't know, but you have to believe when you're doing it that that's the goal. And a lot of times we do things, that's not the goal. The goal is, we got to put something out on this because everyone else is talking about it, so we need to make sure, right? Not that our voice will be so distinct that will actually add something to the conversation or add something unique to the dialogue that's happening, right? So you don't have the guarantee of consequence, but it should be the goal with everything we do. Does that make sense? Does that distinction make sense?
Yeah. And sort of implicit in all of this, and it was kind of seen in the PowerPoint, is
all the arrows,
all those errors and things. Yeah, is you're building bridges through this work, which is real hard to do, particularly in this particular time in American history. How do you do that, or how do you think about that, or am I missing the point altogether?
I mean, man, if I had the answer to that, like I would be some wise person working somewhere. I don't know. But the thing with building a bridge, though, is you have to understand who's on both sides of the river, right? You have to, and like sometimes we build bridges to nowhere, right? And it's like just to say that we're building one, right? And we have no sense of what we're trying to connect to on the other side. The other thing with bridges is they actually take maintenance, right? And that's annoying, like when you're driving over and all the lanes are blocked, when you're any Delaware or Memorial Bridge people or Ben Franklin Bridge or Betsy Ross Bridge or American Legion Bridge, they're always working on it, right? Well, good thing they are, because if they weren't, they require constant maintenance, right? And a lot of times what we do is we say like, oh, we built this linkage with this organization. We put it on our website and it's in our fact sheet, but we never actually do anything to care and feed and support and sustain those relationships. We have to be in the business of bridges. Otherwise, none of us will get to where we're trying to go.
Let's talk a little bit about the culture of communication at RWJ. That's a long-standing thing, but it seems now it is a very central part of how you all are thinking about doing the work, which is frankly, a very significant shift from where the field and the sector has been historically.
Well, I need to give credit to my predecessors because, Frank Carell, who was the first and third VP for communications at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, going all the way back to the 70s, he actually had this idea that communications is not just a service provider. So,
oh man.
Parenthetically, if any of you just see your communications offices as just being your publicist, you're misusing communications. And he had that view in the very beginning, and the work of communications over time has been about sustaining, like, we are not just the in-house publicist for what other people do. We are a program in and of ourselves. So at RWJF, we're major grant makers. When we're thinking about things like goal number 1, goal number 2, goal number 3, a grant we did 2 years ago, more than $4 million, was to Howard University's Center for Journalism and Democracy to fund an investigative journalism program in health equity, right? So we are thinking about the sector, we're thinking about the pipeline, but that came out of the comms department. That didn't come out of
That's
any other
significant.
place.
This is worth
Yes.
hearing. You make grants. You are a
We do.
grant maker in
We do.
addition to being leading strategic comms.
We do. I don't see another way of doing it, right? Without really having an understanding of the media system, the pipeline, how it interconnects. I think it's a misapplication of communications if we don't empower communications leaders in philanthropy to be able to have that tool at their disposal.
So we are at the Next Narrative Summit. I'm going to ask you to sort of pick apart the etymology of that word, narrative. I always think of like the Princess Bride. That word you use, it does not mean what you think it means. What does it mean to you?
I feel that with everything in like strategy and
Oh God, yeah, the white whale.
accountability and like all of these, I started building like a little lexicon of like words that people mean different things when they say, but they say a lot. Narrative for me, I don't have a perfect metaphor for this, and I love anybody who's worked with me before. I love metaphors. I come up with a metaphor for my uses of metaphors. Narrative is sort of like air, right? It's all around us. We're consuming it. We're exhaling it. And it isn't just about sort of aspiration. It's not just what we breathe and what we put out, right? Which that's significant enough, right? There's toxic air that we take in and then recirculate out into the atmosphere. We can take in toxic air and share toxic air and not see it, right? And it happens with narrative all the time. Like, we're up against things and we don't even know that we're taking it in and sharing it with others. But also think about air if you're in an airplane and you're flying against a jet stream, right? And you're going head first. And what will they say? They say we have headwinds. Like, we are literally flying into a countervailing wind that's going the other way. So I think of narrative that way. That's not a perfect metaphor, but it's the way that I try to make sense of it when I think about our work.
And so when you think about health narratives, and it's plural, right? There isn't one, I mean, it may be dominant narratives, but there are many narratives, just as the air in California is probably, the air quality in California is different than what we're seeing here in Florida today. Talk to me a little bit about how you sort of map that out or how you think about that.
Yeah, well, one, it requires expanding the definition narratives of what health is. And for a long time, health was defined as healthcare, right? So health was about this transaction that you had with medical professionals once you got to their office. Advocates and people working on this for a long period of time in partnership with us have said that's actually not the definition of health. Health actually is largely all the stuff that happens before you get there, right? What about your housing? What about your transportation? What green spaces do you have? Like, all of these other things that happen, the air before you ever get to the medical provider. So expanding narratives and definition of health. And the other is detecting these harmful narratives. I mean, that's the problem with it, right? We repeat narratives and like horrible narratives, like individualism. We can't help but believe and buy into individualism. Well, this person got sick. What were you eating? Guess that was some bad choices you made, right? That's so individualistic. And the research tells us that individualism as a mindset or as a broader narrative, that if you lead with that, even if you're trying to correct it, you've already primed people and you can't correct your way, you can't message your way out of it. It is that entrenched in this nation to just believe in, if something bad happened to you, it was because of your bad choices. Sucks to be you, right?
Yep, that is very much an American conceit. So let's talk about, if we have a definition of narrative, it's the air we breathe and it's all around us, and sometimes it's poisonous and sometimes it's sweet. What does narrative change work look like to you? What does that mean to you?
Did we rehearse this question?
Let me see. Yes, we did. What does narrative change in your mind?
So look, I worked at the EPA for a while, as you know, and I worked at the EPA like during the Gulf oil spill and during some of like the major things that were happening. The first thing you need some good air monitors, right? You can't talk about what's, I learned at the EPA that you can't think that clear air is clean air, right? Same with water. Like people make that mistake all the time, actually. They'll say it's clean when they actually mean it's clear. You need air monitors. You actually need to understand what conversations are happening. One of the things that I think is critically important is we've become so sophisticated in actually knowing the conversations that we're having that we have no clue what are some of the other conversations that are happening. I lifted one of these examples up. We were talking about it where there was a whole strand of a conversation happening on social media talking about so-called woke health and woke medicine and how it kills people. We had no visibility into that conversation, but it was shared by someone with a really large following in the millions, and lots of people were being exposed to this conversation that we weren't even tracking. So it requires good radar, it requires good air monitors, and then it requires presenting something different, blowing a new wind, blowing a new air, like putting new things out there to counteract. I mean, that's what you have to do with air pollution, right? You literally have to scrub the air and you have to put something better out there, right? And that requires good detection.
What does success look like? So if you are wildly successful in cleaning the air, and paint me that picture for RWJF.
Oh, you know, wildly successful is like the Brooks-LaSure communications firm, and you know, I have like nice business cards and a really good website, and everybody hires me to be a consultant. It is, for me, the indicator is we're having different types of conversations, but a broader community of people. So for example, we spent about 2 years doing research on how to have conversations about structural racism in health. And we learned a couple of things, and it's research, it's imperfect, and it's right, but it gave us some hints of how to approach this. And what it told us was there are essentially three populations of people. There are people who outright reject the connection between structural racism and health. Like you can talk to them, you can engage them, you can be nice to them, they can be nice to you, you can bring food to their potluck, they can bring it to your potluck, but they're not gonna be down with this concept of a connection. They actually reject it. And there are a group of people who see it, and it doesn't take much convincing, it doesn't take a lot of explanation. And then there are these folks who are, we call them open to the conversation. And you actually can't type them very easily politically. You can't type them easily geographically. But it's a group of people who could sort of sway either way on this, right? And the question is, how do you engage in dialogue with them where you're staying true to the conversation that you're trying to have, but you're actually really listening, right? And I think the challenge with narrative work sometimes is, one, we get obsessed with the song. Two, we never factor in listening. How the heck are we having a conversation with people if listening isn't the most important thing we do in narrative work? Listening has to be part of it, right? Whether you agree or disagree, particularly if you disagree, right? So I think that is what we're trying to do in partnership with others is how can we even have the conversation? You know, what we've done with that research though is try to get more specific. So for the past year and a half, we've looked at sports. So we pulled together sort of a group of experts from Major League Baseball, NASCAR, the NFL, esports. For a whole year, we paid them to come together and to talk and to say like, is sports a good domain to have a conversation about structural racism in health? And we even did some good qualitative and quantitative work that says, well, there's a sliver of NFL fans, 10%, who would be really open to this conversation. It's a much bigger population of WNBA fans or World Cup fans, right? So really giving us some specific answers or indicators of where we could have the conversation. We're starting the process now of doing that with faith, of how are these conversations actually happening on the ground in faith communities. We just granted to one organization that works with Black churches, but we also just partnered with another organization that's going to help us have ecumenical conversations with Muslim leaders, with Christian leaders, with Jewish leaders, and others. How does this actually play out in conversations within your faith community, right? So we're listening.
What's so different about that? I mean, it seems different, but can you sort of unpack that for me? This is a very different way of thinking about the work than RWJ historically has approached it.
Yeah,
Or
I mean,
maybe it had aspired to, but hadn't been able to execute on it.
yeah, and this isn't like, oh, Allyn showed up and we figured it all out. Like, I mean, I really am. I am the beneficiary of work that happened for a long time prior to my arrival. And in fact, it puts me in the position to be able to ask some of these questions that we're asking now. And I think that we have at RWJF a president and CEO who is literally plucked from television.
Yep.
So at no point do I ever have to make the case for communications. I don't, and I have worked at other places where I'm like, you don't understand. This is what comms can do for you. And if you think about it in a strategic way, like, and they're like, shut up, get my op-ed in. I don't hear all that. Shut up and write. But I never have to make the case to him of like, oh, well, see, Rich, you have to understand strategic communication. Like, he came from TV. He really understands the power of it, right? And that just puts me as a person sort of charged with partnering and leading other communicators at the foundation in a really good position, And that makes the soil very fertile to even say, Rich, can we try some stuff? Can we experiment with some things? We aim to be consequential with all of it and recognizing that we probably won't be with all of it, right?
Yeah, but Rich comes from a broadcast model.
He does.
He was on ABC News, chief medical correspondent, if I recall correctly. But that's a very different conceit and approach than what you all are doing, which is doing this work with, I'm going to put words in your mouth, deep sense of humility.
Well, listen, if you don't humble yourself, the world will. And I think it's really important it's easy to slide out of a state of humility to think you have the answer. The mission-driven work, though, it's tough work. And it's work that'll break your heart. And a lot of times the way that we build ourselves up is we calcify around our heart. I've worked a lot of mission-driven organizations. You calcify around and you have this sort of false bravado about like this has to be it. This is it, right? But the way that it's received is you know everything and they don't, right? And I think that you have to resist that urge. You have to resist the urge. And I think being open, making everything a function of we're trying to be consequential and we want to learn, right? And we don't have all the answers. If we have all the answers, we would have so-called solved it all before now.
Let's talk a little bit about the audits that you did. You mentioned this, but I want to go deeper because you did some messaging research as well. You mind just sharing with folks kind of what you found and maybe what surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, the audit findings for us really were leaning on disparity data. It was just reflexive, right? That's like, how else do you talk about health? You say like, oh, because this population diabetes or this population cancer incidence rate, like that's just a natural way to talk about it, right? And you think, oh, that makes it simple for people. They're able to quantify that, they're able to capture it. And just what we saw was that's not what people receive. And in fact, we funded some research that says it does the opposite. Like actually the disparity data, it like jacks people's understanding of what's really going on. So you shouldn't do it at all. Not because, oh, that's not the preferable way to do it, but actually it's harmful if you do that, right? So that was surprising because like everyone in the health sector leaned on health disparity data, right? Some of the work that we were doing with the structural racism and messaging work, we funded some intensive workshops that included people from like public health departments in counties in the South and other places. And they were like, oh my gosh, we talk like this all the time. Like we thought that this worked. This requires us to rethink how we talk about these issues. And it's like, yeah, we got the same lesson too. Like join us. Like we're trying to fix this stuff too. So that was one of the things, right? That was a big surprise.
And that sounds like an embrace of asset framing. I'm going to shine up our friend Travian for a quick minute. Is that how you all think about it? Do you apply asset framing to the work?
We do our best to. But asset framing, it's not a switch, right? Because you can slide into deficit framing on anything. Like, oh, how's your kid doing? Well, all she does is sit around and she don't, people ask me how my 10-year-old daughter is. Well, she's 10 going on 30, but she ain't got no job. She ain't paying no bills in our house. Like, she needs to get employed, right? Why'd I frame it that way?
Right.
I mean, I can tell you why, because she thinks she's grown. But it's easy to slide into that. This is why, if we're going to take a little bit of a departure,
Sure.
We have to understand why we're doing this. And I don't mean why our organizations are doing it. I mean why we are doing it, right? We're all going to leave here and we're going to go back to the places where we work, but also the places that sent us here. And we have to remember why we're doing this. Like for me, it's for the people of Bridgeton. And I don't talk about community in the third person. I'm of Bridgeton and from Bridgeton. I don't live there now, but that will always be my hometown, and those will always be my people. So community is not this third person thing that I sort of travel to. I'm of it. You know, in one of my early meetings at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, I think there must have been 12 of us, because we rolled deep in calls. I think there must have been 12 folks, and I was the only person on the call who was not a PhD or an MD. And I remember like looking at everybody's sort of Zoom name, and I was like, whew. And then I was like, whatever, I'm Bridgeton's ambassador on this call. We're ambassadors of the people who inspired us and motivated us to do this work. And we forget that. We get all caught up in all of this other stuff, and we forget why we're doing it. We talk about why our institutions should do it, but why are we doing it? If we lose sight of why we were called and sent to do this work, we'll never be effective in doing it, right? Because we'll get stuck talking about how, and we'll forget about the why and the who, right?
All right. And you talk.
Sorry, my bad. Sorry about that. Can I get a amen?
And you shared something with me yesterday. I want to see if you'll share it with this group too. That you talked to your daughter about the why, and that your wife does. This is something that you both think about and it's serious to you.
The people who you've heard throughout the course of the day, people tell parts of their stories. And I told you, I'm from Bridgeton, right? Like the most devout, the hardest working, the wisest people, the most thoughtful and caring people I know. I'm from a town where when I would come home from college at church and people would put $20 in my hand, people who I knew didn't have it, and would say, keep doing good. I remember when I graduated college, there was a lady at church who was like, brother, you need a suit.
He survived the Citadel, by the way.
Yeah, survived. You need a suit. And seriously, and she was like, we're going to take you to Boscov's after church next Sunday, and we're going to get you a suit because you're going to go down to Washington, and don't go down there, don't go down there wearing that suit, right? And these are people who didn't have to give, right? These are the folks where I'm from, right? And I carry that with me. So I get privileged to work at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Nobody with my background ever had this job. I mean, I hid from my friends when having to use food stamps and bounce between parents. Dad was a high school dropout, the whole thing, right? My parents did not meet studying for their PhD at grad school, right? Like everyone else, I have the story, right? And everyone here has a story of how they got to this room. Everybody has a story of how they got to this room. And for me, when I talk to her, she says, what do we do? My daughter, who's 10, and I say, you're at Brooks-LaSure. Our job is to help others. That is what we do. Your mother and your father, we have devoted our careers to try to be of service to other people. That's just who we are. And she'll say that now. She'll say, we're at Brooks-LaSure. We have to help people. And I'm like, absolutely right. That's what we do.
That's a pretty cool 10-year-old.
She still needs to get a job.
My daughter's got a babysitting thing going. Maybe we can recruit her in a couple of years when she's older.
Does your daughter need an apprentice?
100%. 100%. What's the future of narrative work? There's a big question. Swing at it any way you like.
I think that more of this is happening, but we have to factor in the cultural dimensions of all of this, right? It isn't just about us getting on stages or even getting behind podiums and saying the right thing. Like we're being bombarded by narratives and all of the, like on the way from the airport, we were bombarded by narratives on like waiting in line someplace. We're encountering it all over the place on our devices, and really trying to be more thoughtful about what is this universe that is sort of pumping all of these narratives out. And how can we be thoughtful about, one, detecting them, right, and thinking about the error, but also figuring out how we can present stronger, more affirming, and more forward-looking narratives about the future that we all want. There's no dispute, like health, I've worked on a lot of issues, environment, internet, diplomacy, et cetera, et cetera. No issue I've ever worked on polls as well as health. Like there's nobody out there like, I want to spend more money on health, right? Like I double the cost of my prescription drugs. Everyone, and no one's like, I don't want to be healthy. Like health, that's overrated. It polls so well. But for some reason, we end up having then this fragmented view of how to get to this future that we all share. We all want this future, right? And really trying from a health equity perspective of how can we live into this while confronting the challenges that are blocking all of us from getting there, right?
You talked about stray voltage.
Yes.
Let's unpack that a little bit, because we are in this new era, where power dynamics are shifting or have shifted. Where we have the one-to-many model that we're all familiar with and that traveled with humanity over the last 1,000 years, to suddenly Bodie McBoatface. You remember this? This is the British Navy commissioned a ship and invited the internet to name it, and they came up with Bodie McBoatface. It's a crowded space, and that's some stray voltage. So how do you think about capturing that current but channeling it in effective ways?
Well, one, I think it's important, depending on where we sit in this work, of knowing where we sit and knowing the distinctions. Like, I work at a philanthropy. We are not up in these streets, and we should never confuse ourselves with the people who are. So I worked in one issue related to international human rights, where I had the opportunity to engage with people all up and down the continuum of service. And the fascinating thing was, they all said they didn't want to be where they were. So in Washington, we were working on laws and policies and advocacy, and people were like, oh my God, we're so separated from what's actually happening, right? And then I spent time in Chad and on the Chad-Sudan border, talking to people that were working in refugee camps there, caring for people that were coming out of Darfur. They were frustrated because they're like, we're doing nothing to change the conditions that caused this, right? So everyone in different parts of this continuum sort of look at other people saying, oh, but like where they are, that's the really consequential part. It all matters. It all matters in different ways, as long as we know what role that we're playing. And I think that is important as we think about the future of the movement, understanding our role and the unique role we play and how it is in support of others. Like philanthropy, we are not the stars. Like, there are times where people want us to use our voice, and we'll do that. But we're really backup singers, and we pay for the microphone. Like, it's your show, sing. Sing, girl.
I sort of think this, and I hope this is something that you'll respond to, is it feels like this is very patriotic work that you're doing. Does that resonate with you, or have I got that entirely wrong?
So, I'm a Black American with roots in this country that, as far as we can trace, go back at least 300 years. The tradition of Black people in this country has always tried to help us live into the values that we articulated. I can't think of anything more patriotic than that, right? Like, we said it, right? And we have been sort of the day watchmen and the night watchmen that are like, yeah, you said you were going to do this thing, do it, right? And there is no higher form of service to a nation and to a people than getting it to live into the values that it articulates, right?
All right, I'm going to offer you a word, and I'm going to give you a chance to respond, because I told you I was going to try to work this in. I'm struggling to think about it. And the word is goonie goo goo.
So 10% of people in here got that, and the other 10% are like, what in the world?
By show of hands, anybody know?
Who got that reference?
Just a few.
Anybody watch Eddie Murphy, Delirious or Raw back in the, yes. So I don't know how we're going to work in Google.
Yeah, I don't know that we can work it in. Maybe there'll be a new narrative
about that. This was a challenge that we had, and clearly we failed.
Yeah, sorry, gang. But he does a mean impression if you want to catch him on stage. I won't put him up to...
I got some ice cream, but you... Want to lick? Psych.
Our friend Chad Nelson, I was having a conversation with him yesterday, and he was sharing that he runs the Surfrider Foundation. Maybe Chad's in the room right now. And he said that they were going through a strategic plan, and one of the things that they discovered, very much to their surprise, was that they were a love-based organization. That the reason that they did the work and the reason that their community existed was built on love. Love of the ocean, love of surfing, love of coasts, all of it. Is RWJF, how would you respond? Do you think that RWJF is a love-based organization?
Dude, we just did this rebrand. Are you trying to go wait, like a love organization based on, I would say it this way, it's heart work. What I said earlier, It is heart work. Mission-driven work, it is heart work. And here's the thing though, I've been in the Washington space enough to know that there are people who do this work who don't love other people. I call them mercenaries, actually, right? They're like, you can't be in communion with people and say that you care about the communal well-being if you actually hate all the people around you, right? And you're just doing it because you love the fight, right? It is, and that is also how we end up being cynical in the work, because the work will break your heart. Mission-driven work will break your heart. You will come to work someday and say, man, I suck at what I do. I thought we were gonna make a difference and we didn't, right? That is crushing, right? If that is what you devote your life to doing. So again, we calcify it and then we become skeptical and then we become cynical, right? And I think that we have to guard for that, because then that prevents our ability to really bring the full love that is required to do this, because it is hard work to do mission-driven work.
I think I know the answer.
And nobody would describe me as like I am not woo-woo or like cuddly, like ask my colleagues who are here, right? But I'm like, there's no getting around, like you are putting your heart forward and trying to work for the well-being of other people that in many cases you don't know, right?
What brings you joy in this work?
I think that there is a joy in being in connection with some really amazing people. Like I come out of meetings with partners and I'm like, those folks are brilliant, right? And it's like, wow, I wish we could fund all of it actually, and that's actually the hazard, you can't. But it gives me joy, particularly in the beginning of my time when I started. Oh gosh, they're recording this. Don't put this part on the internet. So in my last job, I thought my last job was gonna be my last communications job, right? I had done comms for 20 years and I'm like, I'm done, I'm out. I wanna work at a large nonprofit as like a chief of staff, or maybe even be like at a very small nonprofit, like a executive director or something like that. So I was talking to any of you ever talked to headhunters and they gas you up and you're like, you're amazing. Like your background is so interesting, it's so unique, and like I can see it. And I was like, yeah, right? You know what I mean? Like your own personal hype person, right? So they're like, I'm gonna take you to the search committee. And they took me to the search committee and she came back a week later and she's like, yeah, they want someone a little more traditional. So I was like, okay. And she said, well, my colleague is recruiting for a job. Do you want to talk to him? And I was like, I guess. So he said, it is a job working in communications. And I was like, strike one. And he said, it's a job working in health. And my wife has worked in health for the past 20 some years. And I'm like, I will never work in the same sector my wife is in. So I was like, strike two. And they said, it's at this place called the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. I'm like, that's a mouthful, you're out. And the guy was like, well, can I at least send you the position description? And I was like, it was a Friday afternoon, I'll never forget it, during COVID. And I was like, if you don't have anything else to do, sure. And I wasn't even gonna say anything to my wife about this, right? So I'm like, whatever, he sent me this thing, delete. So I said to my wife, guess where I got a position description from? And she said, where? And I said, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. My wife, who's worked in health her whole career, jumped around the house like Tigger. And she was like, oh my God, they're so amazing, like the work they do, and like blah, blah, blah. And I was like, lady, calm down. Like tone it down a bit. And she said, you should at least talk to him, right? So I began having conversations. I'm like, I know what this is. It's another publicist job, right? Where it's like, make the president and CEO famous. And as I was talking to them, and they were like, there's grant making in this job, and it's seeing communications as a strategy and as a program. And I was like, word? And in the beginning, like when I actually got to like two sisters were starting a publication that, sight unseen. And like it got to me and it was like, let's give them some money. Like, let's support them, right? It's now capital B and they're expanding, right? But it was like being able to support these types of efforts. I found an effort that had long existed, the Racial Equity in Journalism Project out of the Borealis Fund. I Googled them and I was like, funds that support like diverse journalists and media outlets. And then I called them and was like, can we give y'all money? And like, that was joyful when it was like, yes, like this is what we should be doing, to be able to partner with people doing amazing things to help them take flight, right?
And so while it breaks your heart, it also fills your cup.
Yeah, yeah.
We have just a couple of minutes left. Is there something that you hope, the one idea that you've landed with folks, that they go home and on Monday, they think, I got to hear my friend Allyn talk about this stuff, and this was the thing he said. And it's the thing that you can offer them up as an offer or a charge. This is something to go forward with.
We're all here because we believe in the power of narrative. So then we should take stock of how we support it within our own institutions, right? Like, that's empirical. those are numbers. You can tell how much money you put behind narrative work at your respective organizations, right? And that's a question that everybody has to go back and ask. How much do we actually put behind narrative work? How do we resource it? How do we staff it? We can't come here and say it's important and then go back and be like, get me on TV. And I think that is a real question that it's important for us to interrogate as a movement. You know, in my last job, I worked on 2 Supreme Court fights. One was the Brett Kavanaugh fight, and the other was the Amy Coney Barrett fight. And it was clear in the very beginning in both of those that we were up against decades of funding and planning, right? No matter how much money fell out of the sky at the last minute, that planning, those roads, that piping existed years ago. And we have to be able to see high and far in the work that we're doing, right? And particularly on the philanthropy side, we've got to be able to do both, and we have the resources, so we should be able to do both. It's not just an opportunity, it's a mandate. We've got to be able to do fast and slow, see near and far, and high and low at the same time, right? Because short-term opportunities are going to arise, and philanthropy has to be agile enough to be able to support them. Why not, in partnership with others, seeing the bigger picture and the longer horizon? So the way that we support narrative work and communications. And the other is just take care of ourselves, right? I mean, to all of the things that we've been talking about, we really do. We're like, oh, I'm going to kill myself. Like, I'm going to work so hard on this, and I'm just going to be exhausted. And we are no good to any movement as broken people. None. We're not. But people swear they are, right? Like, oh my God, like I worked so hard, I killed myself and I advanced the cause. No, you didn't. You just pissed off a bunch of people around you who don't want to work with you, right? And partners who don't want to deal with you. We cannot support a movement as broken people. That wasn't part of I just added that. So y'all can cut that part off if you don't want on there, but I think it's really important.
Why don't we leave it there? Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.